Hey, and welcome to a front-end engineering explained episode. This one is not so much about front-end engineering, but a topic that I don't touch on often, but it's all over the place. We'll talk about it all the time. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about this new tool that came out from the Amazon, called Kiro. It's basically another fork of VS Code that adds AI into it. So think cursor, windsurf, all these things. The thing that made me curious about this one is the spec-driven development that they mentioned about. And I watched a video or two about it, and I was intrigued because compared to, for example, vibe coding or all these other things, this makes a hell of a lot more sense to me. But I was curious whether, again, the examples they've shown was cherry-picked, as things often are in this space right now. So I figured I'd try it myself and see. And from what I've experienced, it wasn't cherry picked. Now, I need to caveat this with the fact that I didn't start with a 2 or 3 sentence prompt. We'll go through the prompt I used, and then I'll show you what I've gotten out of the tool and where I am right now and how I plan to use this going forward. So I have a website called, it's still, I think, called on the website Developer Tool Chest. And for the longest time, I've wanted to kind of rewrite it entirely because I just think from um, a user using the website to find something, it's okay, it's pretty good. But if you want to submit something, it's really terrible. The user experience is not great. It's so bad that I don't use it myself, which tells you a lot. And I want to use it because I built it for a reason. It's something I need, something I want to exist. So, and so I'm kind of renaming it to MakerBench to broaden the tool set, so to speak. I don't think it's just useful for developers. It can be useful for designers. It can be useful for indie makers. So I kind of broadened it. And the whole idea behind it is you submit URLs of tools you use online that maybe you don't use every day, but every now and again you're like, what was that tool that I wanted to use? And you can't remember the name, you can't remember the URL. Maybe you've cleared your browser history or you're in a different browser and it's just not available to you anymore. But you can't remember the name of the URL, but you remember it had something to do with image optimization, or it was a REPL, or it was SVG icons or something. So when you submit the URL, you can add tags. And then when you search, it'll try to match on the title, so the name of the thing, or it'll look at the tags. And if it finds a match in the tags, it's going to return it. So if you're looking for a REPL and you type that in, it'll show you all the REPLs that's in the MakerBench. So that's the idea. But the thing is, I want to make it really easy to submit new tools. And so that is what I was thinking when I thought about MakerBench next. And the thing is, there's a bunch of tools also that I've wanted to experiment with. And so I kind of was able to like massage this idea in my head in a way that I believe this will make for a great user experience for people who are submitting stuff they want to store, but also for then people wanting to find stuff afterwards, whether those are the same people or different people. And at the same time, be able to experiment with these various tools. So the tools that I'm talking about here is Terso, which gives you the SQLite database in the cloud kind of deal. There's more to it than that, but basics. Also S3, believe it or not, I've never really built anything that puts stuff in S3 bucket and then uses it later. So let's do it. The other thing is browserless for doing screenshots because I want it to be easy. Right now, you have to like go get a URL, or not a URL, you have to go get an image from the site, or you have to, like a logo image or something, or it's not great. What I want to be able to do is you submit a URL, you provide your tags. If you want to, you can add your name and a link to your GitHub profile, and I'll show that on the card as well. But then from that URL, I want to derive all the information I need to show on the tool card. So here is the prompt I use. So this big wall of text that you've been staring at, maybe even have read some of in the meantime. This was my prompt. So that's why I'm saying it wasn't a small prompt. So I'll go through it, and I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. So bear with me. So the goal of the project is to create a website for developers where they can submit URLs to web-based tools they often use. It goes beyond just storing links and allow users to also submit tags along with the URL. Often we've used tools in the past, but we cannot quite remember the name or the domain, but we know it was related to SVG or icons or was a REPL, etc. Or we are looking for a tool in these categories. This is where MakerBench shines. In addition to returning matches based on the name of the tool, it will also match associated tags. So if you use a searches for REPL, it'll return all tools in MakerBench that has the tag REPL. If they're looking for open source design, it will return all tools that matches design and open source. The combination open source design. The user interface is deliberately simple. There's a logo, search field, a button labeled suggest a tool, and the grid of the tools in the MakerBench. Each tool is displays an image. This is the screenshot part, which is a screenshot of the website, the title of the tool, a short description, associated tags, and then links to the tool website and relevant GitHub repository if that was provided. By the way, that's another thing you can provide, but it's optional. When a user suggests a new tool, they can also choose to specify their name, GitHub URL. If they provided this, this is also shown on the tool card. When a user clicks the Suggest a Tool button, a form is shown between the search field and the tool card grid. It allows the user to provide a URL to the tool website, URL to the GitHub repository, which is optional, a comma-separated list of tags to associate with the tool, their GitHub username and URL, both of which are optional. Then when submitted, a Netlify function will handle the form submission. It'll try to get an image, title, and short description. So here's the thing. First of all, we're going to try and get the title and a short description just from the page's metadata. We'll most likely be able to just get it from there. If it doesn't contain that, that's a little weird. We should at least be able to get the title, if not a meta description. This can come from either meta tags or from the social share meta content, such as org title, org image, which is where we might already get our image, which means we don't have to do the screenshot thing, and org description. So if no image could be found, then the Netlify function will use the browserless API to take a screenshot of the page at the URL that was provided. But of course, now we have an image file, so what do we do with that? So if a screenshot was obtained this way, the resulting file is stored in the S3 bucket. So that's how I tied that in. Maybe it's over engineering, but bear with me. All of the data for a tool is then stored in SQLite using Terso. Initially, the record has an in-review property set to true, because I can't just assume people will always submit good, proper things. So to avoid weird stuff ending up on the website, we put it in review first. And then while the item's still in review, it's not visible via the website. When a new tool is submitted, an email is sent to a configured email address, notify the admin of new tool that has been suggested. I can maybe use something like resend for this. I didn't mention it here, but it's something that I can kind of think about. What was the other thing I was thinking about also? No, that was it. Some work. So I've already done some work in the project that I opened, into which I provided this prompt. Some work's already been done, mainly concerning the database setup, as can be derived by inspecting the source code of the project. Some additional important details to keep in mind. The project code will be hosted in a public repository on GitHub and deployed using Netlify. The project will use Netlify functions to get data about the provided URL, and then I link to the documentation. The project will use browserless and specifically their screenshot functionality, so I provide a link to that. If screenshots are taken, the resulting files will be stored in Amazon Web Service S3 bucket, documentation on the Node.js SDK, because that's what we can use via the Netlify function. You can provided a link for that. Data about the submitted URLs will be persisted using Terso, and I again provide link to that. And then I also use this opportunity. I've used Prisma in the past, but I've heard a lot of good things about Drizzle, so I figured I'd try that out. And so the project uses Drizzle, and then the Drizzle schema documentation for SQLite specifically, provide the link. And then in closing, I say it's also of critical importance that the site and all functionality is accessible and meets at least AA conformance with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The project will not use Tailwind, but instead CSS written specifically for the project with an aim to define and standardize on a design system of CSS custom property design tokens and reusable components. Care should be taken to adhere to best practices and ensure that the website is performant and simple to use. So that is the big old prompt that I then threw in there, and then I hit enter. And so now this is where things are different from what you might have experienced before, and the part that I really like. It didn't go off and took that and said, okay, I'm going to go away and make code. It didn't do that. It did a whole bunch. I can't scroll all the way back because it's way far in the past here, but it went and it basically looked at the code that existed. It obviously digested the whole prompt, and it made this requirements document. Now, I'm not going to read through all the details here because it's quite lengthy and there's more to it than even just this. But this is the part I really like, because you're actually not just jumping right into code, which is an important skill that everybody should learn. This is not just applicable to enterprise. I think even if you're like one person making things, it's still useful to go through this process where you're really thinking about the thing that you're building. Because as you do that, you often remember little things. Like, for example, I think it's in the design document, which we'll look at next. It talked about data and form validation. And I can't remember what it said, but it wasn't clear how it was planning on doing that. And if you've seen a couple of days ago, I made a video about Zod. And so I wanted to make sure that it uses Zod. Now, for these little things, I don't go back to the AI and tell it, oh, by the way, please update the docs because I want to use Zod. This is just a markdown document. So I can just edit it and it will know that I've made changes to it. So it will take that into account when we move to the next step. So I can just edit things here if I see something that's different than what I actually anticipated, which is great. That's the other thing I like about it. It generates all of this, which is good. But if I find something isn't quite what I had in mind, or by reading this, I think of, oh, heck yeah, there's this other thing, I can add it in here, right? So let's just look. So it does, the introduction is basically just restating the stuff that I already had in my prompt, what the purpose of this tool is. Then it creates these requirements and acceptance criteria. So it has a user story that says, as a developer, I want to search for tools by name or tag so that I can quickly find relevant development tools, even when I don't remember the exact name. And then it has some exact acceptance criteria. For example, when a user enters a search term, then the system shall return tools matching the name, description, or associated tags. When a user searches for REPL, then the system shall return all tools tagged with REPL. When no search results are found, so it's already, this is something I didn't say, but it knows that this is going to be a acceptance criteria for this thing. So when no search results are found, then the system shall display an appropriate no results message. When the search field is empty, then the system shall display all approved tools. So it's thought about, or reasoned about, or whatever you want to call it, not just the default happy paths that I've kind of sketched a little bit, but it's also thinking about common other paths that the UI state might be in. Then it has a second requirement, which is about, I want to view tool information and organize grid layout so that I can quickly scan and evaluate multiple tools at once. So it talks about using a responsive grid layout, when displaying the tool card. A system should show the tool screenshot / image, title, description, tags, and website link. And then it talks about if there's a GitHub thing, then show that, blah, blah, blah. So all of that's in there. Then the third requirement is, as a developer, I want to suggest new tools. So this talks about submitting new stuff. So when a user clicks suggested tool, the system shall display a submission form between the search field and the tool grid. This stuff, basically, this talks about the data that should be there. The system shall require a tool website URL, shall require a list of one or more tags, shall allow optional GitHub repository URL, submit a name, submit a GitHub URL. When the form is submitted with valid data, system shall process the submission via notify function, and on and on. Requirement 4, as a system administrator, I want submitted tools to be automatically processed for metadata so that the platform maintains consistent and rich tool information. So this talks about what we want to get out of those URLs submitted and how the APIs and tools that we'll use, like browserless, Terso, and so forth. And then again, as a system administrator, I want to review submitted tools. So this talks about that fact before they appear publicly. When a tool is submitted, then the system shall set it in review to true. Blah, 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 talks about all that. Also about the email notification. And then as a user with accessibility needs, so that is taken into account. I want the platform to be fully accessible so that I can use all features regardless of my abilities. So when using screen reader, then the system shall provide appropriate ARIA labels and semantic HTML. And I've guided it a little later to say ARIA labels only when necessary. So don't just stick ARIA labels on things. Use the semantic HTML elements that has already the implicit roles and states and all these things. When navigating with keyboard only, then the system shall provide visible focus indicators, logical tab order. Viewing content, system shall meet WCAG 2.1 AA color contrast requirements. Images are played, then the system shall provide meaningful alternative text unless the image is purely decorative. That is something I added because you have to kind of think about I just kind of have to think about how to do this. There's still something that I need to figure out in my head because sometimes there might be text in the screenshot that you then maybe or maybe not. I still have to decide whether I want to think about these images as purely decorative. This is where I'm leaning towards, but again, something to think about. When forms are presented, then the system shall associate labels with form controls, provide clear error messages. As a user on any device, so here it talks about performant and responsive. So it talks about mobile devices, shall display responsive layout optimized for small screens, Requirement 8, as a developer maintaining the platform, I want a clean CSS architecture without framework dependencies, so the code base remains maintainable and performant. So in styling components, CSS shall use CSS custom properties and design tokens. It talks about not using Tailwind. Creating reusable styles, shall define standardized component classes. Organizing CSS, the system shall maintain a clear design system with consistent spacing, typography, and color schemes. When building for production, the system shall optimize CSS delivery and minimize unused styles. So these are all the user stories and acceptance criteria that it is suggested. I could add to this, I can remove from this, whatever the case may be. Once you're happy with this, you basically click a button over here on the right hand to say, cool, let's move on to the design phase. So then it takes all of this into account and it moves on and you get a design document. It's even longer. And I'll show you a really cool thing that it did. Let me just minimize this. So again, it gives you an overview. It's a React-based web application. This is a developer tool delivery platform. The system consists of a front-end React application, notify functions for backend processing, integrates with multiple external services, Terso, browserless, AWS S3 to provide a complete tool submission and discovery experience. Then it created a mermaid graph. So if we go in here, let me see if I can just zoom in here a little bit. Well, okay, that didn't quite work, but here we go. So it creates this high-level architecture here where you can see how the data is going to flow through the system, which I think is pretty damn neat that it did that. And then, so we can go back. So that here's the mermaid diagram over here. Talks about data flow, user searches, running queries, Terso, results displayed in grid, tool submission flow, admin review flow. And then it breaks down all the components, your front-end components, your core layout components. You have an app layout, you have a header component, search and discovery, you have a search bar component. It describes some TypeScript interfaces here for it. Talks about implementing debounced search, provides real-time search suggestions, includes clear search functionality, supports keyboard navigation. Tool grid, again, has the interface, TypeScript interface, and breaks down that stuff. Also talks about, this is where I guided it to, it sounded like it wanted to use a JavaScript library to implement lazy loading. And I was like, no, we can just use loading equals lazy, and the other similar HTML attributes that we can use to improve image performance. Handle empty states and error states, provide keyboard navigation, and then our tool card props breaks that down. Then we get into a form component, tool submission form, native HTML form validation with Zod schema validation, leverages HTML required, type URL, and pattern attributes, provide accessible error messages, supports progressive enhancement with JavaScript validation layer, because I wanted to put no validate on the form when we're handling it with JavaScript. Reasons for that, I can go into that in a separate video. And then include proper labeling, field set grouping. Again, very nice. Tag input props. So it talks about the specific input element that will handle your tags. So more of a rich one. You've probably seen these where you type in and it shows you the tags and you can click clear or tab and press enter and it clears it and it removes it, that kind of thing. And then it goes into the backend API, submit to request, again, suggests your interfaces for that. Your get tools function, same deal. Data models, your Zod validation schemas, it kind of starts with your please enter a valid GitHub URL, tag cannot be empty, please enter a valid GitHub URL. And your tool schema, your tag schema, all of that here. Your TypeScript types that it infers. It uses Zod infer to infer the TypeScript types from your schemas, and then you can it exports these so you can use them in TypeScript. Then it goes into the database schema, so all your table, your bookmark, so your bookmarks table as columns, error handling, network errors, handle form validation errors, image loading errors, backend error handling like metadata extraction, like graceful degradation when page metadata is unavailable, fallback to basic URL information, logging for debugging failed extractions, screenshot, retry logic, database operation failures, transaction rollback, proper error responses. The transaction, we'll have to see. Like SQLite probably does. Well, SQLite doesn't have transactions, and maybe Terso's built something on top of that to implement a type of transaction. But again, that's fine. Database connection retry logic, and then also tests. I didn't mention tests. It obviously knows that this is key part of it. So suggesting unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, and then back-end testing, again, functional API contract tests, so request response validation, and then performance testing, core web vitals measurements, bundle size optimization, backend performance, function cold start, database query, external API, all that kind of stuff, accessibility testing, automated with Axe Core, color contrast, semantic HTML, and then some manual testing that is suggesting as well, screen reader navigation, keyboard only, focus management, ARIA label, and all that. Then it dives into CSS architecture and the design system. So here's some design tokens it's suggesting for fonts, your different colors, your font sizes, and it's using rem, which I'm really happy to see. Uses unit list for your line heights. Spacing, again, using rems, which is really cool. The one thing, I don't think it's here, it's a bit later, where also it's using references here with the grid gap, which is nice. Some shadows, transitions. Goes on to the component architecture, CSS reset, typography base styles, layout styles, component styles. So here it uses media queries with pixels. This is still where I want to guide it to instead use rem. And I'll probably only, the 4 breakpoints is probably okay. And then it goes to the grid layout. Then it talks about performance, about code splitting, asset optimization, caching strategies, backend optimizations, database optimizations, and then security considerations, which is really cool. Input validation. Believe it or not, this is something that a lot of applications and websites on the internet do not do, or they do very little, or they'll only do client side. And if you're going to skip something, skip the client side and make sure that you do validation on the back end, because you can bypass the front end in various ways. One of those is by using something like curl, for example, and just hitting the back end from a terminal. So URL validation, sanitization, tag input, cross-site scripting prevention, because we're dealing with user-generated content. API security, so rate limiting, cores, input validation again, and then data protection, secure handling of admin email addresses, so making sure that no like private keys and things like this leaks. So that is everything in the design document. So once I was happy with this, I said, sweet, let's go on to the implementation. So it generates another document for you. And this time it breaks down how you could build this into main tasks, and each task has separate topics that you need to complete in order to be able to check off the one. So you can imagine epics and tasks almost, or features and tasks, something like that. So set up the project foundation and validation. So this is getting Zod up and running, create validation schemas, set up TypeScript types inferred from Zod. Then it's going to do database stuff, then create the CSS design system and base styles. Now you can do this from 1 all the way through to, I think it suggested 21 in the end of the day. Yeah. Or you can jump around if you want to. It recommends you go from top to bottom, but you're free to do it whichever way you want. So basically when you click the start task, that's when it jumps in and starts writing code. Up until now, no code has been written, nothing. We've just thought through the architecture, the design, what are the requirements, what are the user stories, all these kinds of things. Just been thinking through this. And now we're thinking about what is the best way to implement this kind of stuff. So create the CSS design and base styles, build the core layout components. Again, it's ensuring AA compliance, WCAG compliance. Implement search, 300 millisecond delay. It's that debouncing, keyboard navigation. So this is the tool displays, the tool cards, create the tool submission form, implement front-end API integration, build a netlify function for tool submission, then implement screenshots. So with browserless, it makes sense for that to be a task by itself. S3 integration, again, is a task by itself, which makes sense. Create database integration as a thing by itself. Admin notification system. Again, these are big topics, big features. So it makes sense for them to be one task by itself. Implement client-side search and data retrieval. Here again, I guided it a little bit differently because it wanted to also go through a netlify function, which I couldn't understand why you'd want to do that, because you do have a Terso has a JavaScript, TypeScript API that you can use directly from the client. And so I was wondering, is there maybe a security reason you'd want to do that? Maybe, but not really. And you're introducing latency if you're going to go through a netlify function again here. So it like, okay, yeah, that makes more sense to just do it directly. So this was updated after that whole conversation. The implementing search. Now we're getting to the form submission, performance optimizations, comprehensive error handling, create accessibility enhancements if needed, and then write comprehensive test suite, which is great. So this is accessibility testing, API endpoints and form submission, end-to-end tests for user workflows using Playwright. I made that specific because I want to make sure that it's using Playwright. And then configure netlify deployment with proper environment variables, database migration, production, configure external service integrations, add monitoring, error tracking, and here I said, again, using Sentry because I want to use specifically that. And then I basically, after going through this, making some edits and suggestions, I kicked off the first task, and it did all the things. It created these schemas for me with all the inferred TypeScript types and different validation functions, and something I'm going to make a video about. I'm glad it did this. I was really impressed when I saw it did it. This is something I wanted to talk about in my next video about Zod when we talk about form validation. It's not something unique to Zod, but because Zod, you create your functions to do data validation, you can write tests, unit tests, to test that your validations are working as you expect it to. And so it also wrote some using Vite. I didn't it suggested Vite, and I was happy with that because that's what I would have recommended. Um, you can see here's two schemas it hasn't written tests for, so this is something I need to follow up with. So, but you can see it validates tool submission, should validate a valid tool submission. So it basically gives it a valid submission, gives it to validate tool submission, and then test that the result's success. Then here it uses a invalid URL and it expects it to be false, and so on and so forth. It also made some utility functions, for example, to take the tags and then split it, and turn it into an array essentially. So here it should validate non-empty tag array. So expect validate tags. So it's validating that. Down here, it takes a string, comma separated string, and expects it to return an array. And then it wrote an additional test and it said, okay, what if there's extra white space in here? Does it handle that well? And so it does that. So all of these tests were written. So my plan going forward with this, and the thing is what it also does every now and again is I can show you over here. Yeah, it ran TSC to make sure that there's no compilation errors. Then it ran npm run lint to run ESLint to make sure there's no linting errors. And then it kind of moves on, and then it created the validation stuff. Then it ran the tests to make sure all the tests pass. Created the vtest config, ran the test. Then again, at this point, it ran TSC again to make sure there's no compilation errors. And then it basically updated my tasks to show that this is now complete. And here you can view the execution and you can view your changes also, the changes that's been made. I really like this. This is for me, I like the approach here. I feel a lot more in control of what's happening. I don't feel like I just put a couple of sentences and it goes off and does God knows what. I have a much better sense of what's happening here and what the outcome of this part of the work is going to be. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a pull request with all of this. I'm then going to sit and review this pull request. Me, human guy. I'm going to do this. And then at the same time, if there's anything I'm unsure about, I'm like, I don't know, is that right? Is that the best way to do it? I'm going to do some research, especially for new things like the Terso stuff and the browser list stuff and things like this, so that I can learn also through this process. And I'm not necessarily going to always just let it go and do everything for me. Sometimes I want to jump in and say, I can take care of this part. And then what suggestions do you have based on what I've done? That kind of thing. So I don't want to do it I'm handing this off to you and just sitting back or going to bed and standing up tomorrow and see what's there. Because you could do that. You could just click start task, start task, start task, because it will run them. I believe it will run them probably one after the other, because you never know if one thing could cause conflicts with another thing. So you couldn't run them all at the same time. But I'm pretty excited about this. So far, I'm really impressed with the choices it's made with technologies and things like that. I really like this thinking through the details before just jumping in and writing code. I really think this is a really good approach, and it feels a lot more collaborative. And even on a team, this makes sense because you have a bunch of documentation about the decisions that's been made, the technologies that's being used, why things are the way they are. It's not just a couple of prompts and a bunch of code that's spit out the other end and nobody really knows why and how and what now, what do we do going forward. I feel like this just by the process creates a lot of documentation and a lot of artifacts that is useful long-term to the project. So I really like it. I'm definitely going to play with this some more. And as I run into things that I find is really interesting or useful or stuff I really don't like, maybe it goes off the rails at some point and I'm like, uh-oh, this is a disaster. I really hope not, because so far it looks really promising. It's a different way of using these tools and something that makes much more sense to me. So yeah, I'm excited about using this. If you use AI tools, have you tried Kiro? What do you think about this spec-driven approach? that they've taken here. They give you the option to do the vibe thing if you want, but also like the wording there. It's kind of a prototype. So maybe you just throw something together using vibe coding, and then that informs your thoughts for the spec-driven thing when you're actually going and building the real thing. So you're kind of vibing a prototype, which is like, yeah, this could be cool, but, because you could get to play around with it a little bit. And then you kind of throw that away and then use that to inform your whole spec-driven development. So I think there's a place for that, but not from that to production without generating all these like useful documentation artifacts. That's a mistake. I'll go on record and say that. What do you think? Have you tried it? Will you try it? We look forward to hearing what you think in the comments. It's quite a long video, but there's so much to go through. Yeah, let me know in the comments what you think. If you've used it, if you're planning on using it, if you hate it, if you love it, if you're indifferent. All opinions and views are important, and you have to find the thing that works for you. For me, this seems like something that I can integrate into my building and making process, and I feel like this will be helpful to me in the long term. Until the next one, have fun, build cool stuff, but always make sure that it's accessible. Peace.